What's up, everybody, and welcome to another crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by Kyle Krabs, the outstanding host of Locked On Dolphins. We're here to get you ready for Week 15, a big one. The Dolphins coming to Buffalo for an AFC East matchup with some big-time implications. Of course, crossover Thursday is presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun and it's easy to play. There's no competing with other players. It's just you versus the projections available. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less in their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It can literally take less than 60 seconds to enter. It is that easy. We love Prize Picks, and we know that you will too. In fact, first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. Kyle, what's going on, dude, man? Welcome.
Hey, prime time, Bills, Dolphins, Saturday night, only show in town. Couldn't possibly, well, I say that, but it could probably be worse than the last time the Dolphins were on prime time on Sunday Night Football. But looking forward to this rematch between these two teams. Of course, they played that last man standing match in Miami in week 3, and kind of the pendulum swings of that game. And you mentioned it's a big one, for the Dolphins. The only hope that they have to win the AFC East is to run the table and have the Bills potentially drop another game, whether that be New England or Cincinnati. The third at Chicago is the only other game on the schedule for Buffalo. So Buffalo's in the driver's seat here in the AFC East, and it's do or die time for the Dolphins. And what I'd be really interested in is they just played a team that was in do or die mode on Sunday night against the Chargers, and the Chargers got after them and really played physical with them and dictated terms of that game. And I'm interested to see if the Dolphins have it in them to try to claim any of that for themselves in what is going to be a cold, frigid, probably white game as far as playing in Buffalo on Saturday night.
And Kyle, I think that for me is the biggest storyline for this ball game is going to be just the elements and the weather that we're anticipating right now, courtesy of weather.com. Their forecast for Saturday night: snow likely, low near 25, winds 10 to 15 miles an hour, chance of snow 70% with accumulation coming between 1 and 3 inches during that window. And of course, it's supposed to snow before the game as well. So we're looking at a cold weather game here in Western New York. And Kyle, as exciting as that sounds for the Buffalo Bills, I'm old enough to remember Jay Ajayi and what was it, 2016, December 24th, 206 rushing yards.
Overtime.
I'm old enough to remember Reggie Bush in 2011, 25 for 203 yards, December 18th, Dolphins win. I can also remember Ricky Williams with some big games in the snow. So for as much as this feels like it should be an advantage for the Buffalo Bills, and I think it will be, it does come with that reality that Dolphins teams in the past have been able to come up and do it in these situations. And so is that going to happen this week? Do they have Jeff Wilson? Can they run the ball? Will they run the ball? I think that's going to be really interesting to find out on Saturday, because you feel like this Dolphins offense is very much at a crossroads a little bit. There's been some tape out there that have given teams some clues. And I'd go back to week 3 against the Bills, where the Bills played the highest percentage of press coverage against Miami. You've seen that replicated a little bit here lately, some inside leverage, middle of the field close, trying to get them to throw the ball outside the numbers. If it's going to be windy and cold and wet, the Dolphins are inevitably going to have to kind of change the way they play offense to begin with. And so to me, that's scary and exciting from the Bills' perspective, where it's scary in that you don't know what to expect from this football team because they're going to play it differently. It's exciting also because we know how much success the Dolphins have had offensively, and they have to get away from that potentially just because of the elements. So it's going to be really interesting to see what this game looks like.
Yeah, I think it's a black cloud with a silver lining for Miami, because you've kind of seen this bravado the last couple of weeks from a play calling perspective, where everything's super aggressive. Tua's average intended air yards against the Chargers on Sunday night was 12 yards, average intended air yards, like everything. There were no easy completions that were created. There were no easy completions, no underneath attempts just to gain some yards and stay on schedule offensively. So we're coming out firing on 1st and 10. Well, and you're incomplete. Now all of a sudden you're in 2nd and 10, and you're either going to take the low percentage play to run the ball on 2nd and 10, or you're going to have to throw it again and run the risk of being in 3rd and 10. And the Dolphins have lived in that world largely the last 2 weeks. So I think the weather elements, I would hope they prompt this Dolphins team to look themselves in the mirror and be honest about who they have up front and what they are capable of doing. Jeff Wilson's availability will be huge for the ability to run the ball because they have had their most success on the inside run. They just don't have the tight end room right now to gain the edge and run off the edge and use Raheem Mostert's speed to the best of his ability. So running inside, they have 3 guys that at least have a reasonable claim to a Pro Bowl spot for their individual performance, between Teron Armstead and him playing through all the injuries and obviously being a well-established player. Robert Hunt's been one of the best guards in football individually at right guard. And then Connor Williams has been very, very good the last couple months. It feels like it was 2 years ago, but it was just a month ago that the Dolphins dropped 200 rushing yards on the Cleveland Browns. They're capable of doing it, but yet they just have elected not to. So I agree with you in the elements being like the number one storyline for this game. And I thought it was funny that you mentioned the 2016 game, because on the Wednesday show on Locked On Dolphins, I was like, man, when's the last time the Dolphins went up to Buffalo and won? And it was 2016 in that overtime game on Christmas Eve with, I believe, Matt Moore was the quarterback at that point. That was after Ryan Tannehill had suffered his knee injury against Arizona to put the team in a position to make the playoffs and guaranteed that they were going to have a winning season. So it can be done. But the Dolphins have to ask themselves some very hard questions. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think about the Bills too. And Joe, I'm interested from your perspective. You know, the Bills have been streaky offensively as of late. And obviously they played an elements game last week against the Jets. And do you think that experience helps them in this kind of game, or because the conditions are a little different where it was chilly but rainy versus snow? Like how do you anticipate that the Bills are going to have to play this game differently, if at all?
Well, what's been interesting about the Bills this year is obviously everybody had such huge expectations for them this year. And on one hand, they're 10-3, sitting number 1 seed in the AFC. On the other side of things, I don't think you could call this a dominant football team. Maybe they were at times earlier this season, but for the most part, they've been a gritty football team, which has not necessarily been true about the teams in 21 and 20. It's been, okay, they go out and boat race them or they lose. And this year they've been able to boat race a few teams, but they've also, the last 4 games have been tight, gritty wins where they've had to make some plays at the end and come up with some opportunistic turnovers. And, the offense hasn't necessarily been this juggernaut that's hard to deal with. It's in a lot of ways been Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs do something. And, maybe there's enough ancillary components around it that can show up on a weekly basis, whether that's sometimes a rushing offense with James Cook and Devin Singletary, or sometimes Isaiah McKenzie, or sometimes Dawson Knox, or sometimes Gabriel Davis. But I don't think it's ever been Stefon Diggs plus something else with any level of consistency. And when you consider the turnover lull that they went through, really starting the second half against Green Bay, about a 3-game stretch there, 10 quarters, they turned over the ball 6 times, and not just like 6 turnovers that were inconsequential. These were like back-breaking, red zone, just horribly timed bad moments for the Bills. Now, getting out of that, they've done very good. Only 2 turnovers the last 4 games since that turnover streak, but that's come with a cost. It's come with, I don't necessarily know that there's a better word to say than neutered the offense, where Josh Allen hasn't necessarily been vintage Josh all the time. We've seen it in moments, but it's been more pick and choose with him when you consider not just kind of coming out of a stretch of bad turnovers, but a stretch where he's had to play through this elbow injury, right? Where everybody saw it after the Jets game. There was a lot of rumblings about the severity of it. We know that it's bothering him, right? We've watched enough Josh Allen to know that he's not necessarily everything that he usually is. And I think part of it is just kind of working through the turnovers and balancing that aggressive nature with taking care of the football and being who you are, but also not putting your team in some bad spots. And so I think they've kind of had to work out of that over the last few weeks. But the point being is they've had these gritty, resilient wins. And I've said openly multiple times that for as much as Sean McDermott has said his team is resilient in the past, I haven't believed him. I didn't believe him until this year, where I've actually bought into that being true, because they've met some really, really challenging moments, whether it's been working through a multitude of injuries or their own challenges with playing a ton of road games and 3 road games in 12 days and the snowstorm, limited practice opportunity. There's been a lot of challenges that this team has faced and met this year. And so while they haven't been dominant, I'm not going to sit here and act like they have been gritty. And for the most part, they've really taken care of their business. They have 3 losses by a combined 8 points. And I think you can look at all 3 of those games, and you can do this for every team probably, and realize, well, they really had a good chance to win those ball games. So I think everything the Bills have been through this year has put themselves in a decent spot here to meet a situation where I think there's going to be a lot of adversity for both teams to face on Saturday night. At Locked On Bills and Locked On Dolphins, we believe that your home should be where you and your family feel safe, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, SimpliSafe. And right now, SimpliSafe is offering Locked On Bills and Locked On Dolphins listeners 40% off a new security system, but don't put this off. Here's why I love it. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use fast protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify that the threat is real so you can get higher priority police responses. This thing is set up very nicely. SimpliSafe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. So don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any new system at simplisafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. That's simplisafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. All right, Kyle Krabs, co-founder of the Draft Network, lifelong fan of the Miami Dolphins.
Yes.
I heard about this stuff before. I really have. Let's get into some matchups, man. We talked a lot of big picture stuff here in that opening segment. We set the tone here. And now let's get into the nitty gritty, some matchups here that we think can win this football game. I'll give you the 4 here to go first.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in seeing how the Dolphins offensive line handles Buffalo's defensive front. The first time these two teams played, Ed Oliver did not play, but Von Miller did. So now you have the exchange. And quite frankly, I think Ed Oliver has a chance to be a pretty big pendulum swing in Buffalo's favor, depending on how the Dolphins' interior offensive line lines up. Particularly the left guard spot has been problematic, whether it was Liam Eichenberg or Robert Jones the last month since Eichenberg has been on IR. Eichenberg was activated last week, did not play. So that's a potential swap for Miami to take a UDFA who has limited athleticism and replace him with a second-round pick who's more athletic, but has been more of a career underachiever to this point in time. And is the time away good for Liam Eichenberg? Does it help? We've got Teron Armstead, who played last week, who's been an absolute warrior, playing through, let's see, he's got a pec strain. He's had a big toe since week 2, and now he has a knee injury. So he's out there right now, held together by duct tape, but he's putting it out there on the line and really laying it out there. And you can't help but respect the effort that he's making to play. I mentioned the other 2 interior offensive linemen that I think are actually playing really, really good football this season individually. And then you have the right tackle spot. So where does Greg Rousseau come into this matchup? Unfortunately, we won't get to see the AJ Epinesa-Austin Jackson matchup that I think Epinesa is undefeated in his entire career, going all the way back to when USC and Iowa played in the, what was it, the Holiday Bowl, or it was the bowl game at Yankee State, the Pinstripe Bowl, I think. Yeah, man, like Epinesa has just owned Austin Jackson. Well, Austin Jackson played 70 snaps this year, and he missed the first game, and he'll miss this one as well. So bummer that AJ's not going to get 3 sacks this week like he would have if Austin played, just based on historical trends. But the interior penetration, how's Jordan Phillips looking? I believe he did not play last week, didn't practice on Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't know about old Jordan Phillips. He might not be able to go this week.
Well, Jordan's also good for a sack and a half against the Dolphins every time he plays them too, with the Jordan Phillips revenge game layer from his tenure with Miami and the departure with, I believe, was Adam Gase to cut him loose. So
hey, maybe your guy Greg Rousseau can step up here and make some of those.
Yeah, I think he's the one who has the chance to really test. You saw, I thought Teron Armstead did a good job against Khalil Mack in the instances that they had matched up against each other. Mack wasn't the kind of pest that Joey Bosa was, or Nick Bosa was the week before when the Dolphins played the 49ers. But Ed Oliver and Greg Rousseau are the two guys that I have circled for Miami. And how are you going to handle those individual matchups? Because Oliver's quickness is unparalleled versus what the Dolphins have at left guard. And if I'm Buffalo, I'm putting 91, right? I'm putting 91 right up over top of left guard. And I'm saying, hey, go get in the backfield and create a mess.
Yeah, give Kyle Krabs his flowers. He had the first round grade on Greg Rousseau, stood through the whole time. I talked myself out.
Hold
of
your
it,
ground.
So.
You
know, we tend to do that with inevitable players that the Bills and Dolphins wind up getting. Right. But here we are. It's funny. Your answer here is a lot like my answer here, where I have a level of concern about some of the guys that the Dolphins have up front on that defensive line against the Bills offensive line. And I want to start with Bills right tackle Spencer Brown against Jaylen Phillips. Spencer Brown's been a very high variance player, and that concerns you against a talented football player like Jaylen Phillips, who's been unbelievably disruptive this season for the whole time. And I think he's kind of playing his best football right now. We saw what he did to that Chargers offensive line, as well as Christian Wilkins, who was absolutely dominant in that football game, going up against Ryan Bates, Roger Saffold. We'll see if Ryan Bates can go this week. He was injured last week. Greg Van Roten had to finish the game, and so whether it is Greg Van Roten, who's a backup, a reasonable backup, but a backup, or Roger Saffold, who I don't think is having a great season, you feel like Christian Wilkins got to be licking his chops against some of those matchups on the interior, and that's not where the list stops for this Dolphins front. They've got Melvin Ingram, who's a Buffalo Bills killer no matter what team he's playing for. He kills the Bills. They got Bradley Chubb, obviously a high-quality defensive lineman. Zach Sealer's out there. They got guys. They got dudes up there, and I think part of the reason the Jets have been able to have a lot of success against Buffalo defensively this year is because that defensive line, that front seven, just is so deep with guys that can penetrate and get in the backfield. And I feel like the Dolphins have a very similar situation, and maybe even more talent. And you start to respect guys like an Andrew Van Ginkel, who plays with his hair on fire all the time, and Raekwon Davis. I mean, there's guys after guys here on this front here. And so in this type of game where I thought in week 3, the Bills didn't do a good enough job of knowing how they wanted to respond to the Dolphins fronts, which are always very much, muddy fronts, guys up on the line of scrimmage, who's coming, who's leaving, trying to set up those one-on-one matchups. And sometimes they bring some extra guys. And I thought the Bills were kind of in a crisis of, okay, do we protect here or do we throw hot? Right. And I think that Josh Boyer got him a few times on that. And Ken Dorsey got Josh a few times as well, but can they have more wins this time around to avoid some of those negative plays and take advantage of what the Dolphins are going to kind of give you if they do commit those extra bodies and take players out of coverage to rush. And so I guess that's a matchup not only from the Bills offensive line against a good Dolphins defensive line, but also the coaching element here from Ken Dorsey versus Josh Boyer here in their second matchup head-to-head.
Well, and a name that you didn't mention did not partake in this matchup the first time these two teams played because he was playing for the Denver Broncos, Bradley Chubb. And Bradley Chubb has come in and he has 2.5 sacks since the trade deadline. You're probably, he got the $20+ million a year contract. You're kind of expecting big things. He's kind of taken over the role of what Jaylen Phillips was early in the season for Dolphins fans, as a guy that gets a lot of pressures, but is not finishing with sacks right now. So bit of a interesting identity for the Dolphins where they the last 2 weeks have shown the willingness to get those bodies up on the line of scrimmage and give you some zero looks on the back end and either drop out or actually come. And they've lost a lot of DBs this season, but when you traded for Bradley Chubb, your expectation was kind of, okay, well, they're going to go after you with your front four and play 7 in coverage. So how they choose to balance that, I think Josh Boyer will at least have an extra wrinkle. But I think you named the right two guys in Jaylen Phillips and then Christian Wilkins. I mean, Christian Wilkins is tied for 6th in the NFL in tackles for loss this year with 14. He's playing all-pro caliber football on the inside for the Dolphins. I don't know that he'll get those accolades, but if you just watch him week in and week out, he's played like he played the Chargers just about every week he's played this season. Now, for the Dolphins specifically, getting the quarterback on the ground has been a big problem as far as finishing those plays, and Josh has quintessentially been the embodiment of that for him. But we've talked about both defensive lines, and you've mentioned the coaching. This is the contrast between the quarterbacks, right? Is Josh is somebody who, when a play is broken or he has to get outside of structure, he can do that. Whereas Tua Tagovailoa, he's shown this season you can win, and he played MVP caliber football for 3 months. But he has to have the right plays. He has to have the right structure. He's not somebody who is going to thrive outside of structure the same way that Josh Allen does. They're very different physical skill sets in that regard. So that's where, for me, the coaching comes back to the discipline, like we talked about in the first segment, of Mike McDaniel to allow his quarterback to get into a rhythm early, because he was 3 of 12 in like each of the last 2 games as far as trying to get things started offensively. Can you find some completions to get into structure and find a feel for what Buffalo is going to try to do so that he can get into his own rhythm? Whereas Josh doesn't necessarily need that, because he can break a 20-yard gain and hurdle a guy and go helicoptering over a guy out of bounds on a big-time scramble on 3rd and 12. He can live in that world. Tua can't. So that, for me, from just the quarterbacks and the offensive standpoint, I think the coaching becomes more critical offensively for the Dolphins because their quarterback is at his best inside of structure, whereas Buffalo has somebody who's good in structure but can also excel and thrive outside of structure as well.
I'd love to ask you a question here, as I've spent a lot of time thinking about it this week, but you spent a lot of time studying it, not just this week, but really over the last year of your life, really learning the ins and outs of the tendencies of Mike McDaniel and his histories in the past and what you've observed this season. What is your expectation here in terms of the wrinkles that he's going to implement, not only due to the weather, but due to some of what's been put on tape here with inside leverage, middle of the field closed, to force Tua to play kind of deeper into the reads and trying to force some of those throws more towards the numbers and away from the middle of the field? What does he go to? Because I've started to think about it, and I thought maybe there's involving the backs a little bit more in the passing game. But as teams try to force Tua to go to different places with the ball, I wonder about the guys like Mike Gesicki, Cedric Wilson, Trent Sherfield, if they start being more willing to go to them on some one-on-one matchups to open up some of those ancillary components outside of the nightmare that is Waddle and Hill.
Well, there's no question that they've been very Hill-centric. I mean, Waddle has even been an afterthought the last couple of weeks, and he got banged up against the 49ers, and I get it. He's not on the injury report as of right now for this upcoming week. So expectation is both guys will play. But yeah, I mean, the whole, I know I mentioned the word bravado, I think was how I described it. You know, Mike Gesicki's an afterthought. He's got 5 targets in the last 3 games. He hasn't caught a ball in the last 3 games.
Since the bye, right?
Since the bye. He has not caught a pass.
Yeah.
Well,
which is crazy because you have to understand the Bills, myself, we've had this conversation 1,000 times. Gesicki catches all these passes against the Bills, and I'm like, dude, this guy's got to be an every week monster. And then just he isn't.
Well, the routes that he's best at are the routes that if you want to win with run after catch, and the Dolphins have aspired to do that, they haven't necessarily put that on. They're middle of the road this year. They're not tops of the charts like what the San Francisco offense has been. His best routes are the same routes that you want Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle running, because you're getting more explosive plays out of that, right? So they've had stretches of play, and Tua's had stretches where they have really nice throws outside the numbers. They'll take Tyreek Hill on that jet motion, and they'll have him run deep outs and comebacks, 15, 20 yards downfield. We've seen them go to 3-by-1 and run stick or designed out route patterns where Jaylen Waddle is pressing up to the line to gain, and he's breaking outside, and it's a really good timing throw. And the timing has been there as such where if it's a tick late or if it's a tick inside, it's a pick going the other way. And they've hit those throws with consistency throughout the course of the season. But this past week, for whatever reason, I think the coaching was fine against San Francisco, and Tua just missed a lot of throws. I think he played on a 12 out of 10, and it showed. Whereas I thought the coaching against the Chargers was what really let them down. And they have these clubs in the bag. Now it's up to them to go back to them. But with the elements, I'm not sure this is going to be the greatest showcase for them to do that. So really, it it's gut check time for this offense. It really is to ask yourself, like, what kind of pride do you have in running the ball? What kind of pride do you have in trying to win the line of scrimmage? They are physically capable of it. Between Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, Brandon Shell has been an adequate starting right tackle, and Teron Armstead. Are we really going to let tight ends and a left guard completely prevent us from running the ball and having any semblance of balance offensively? I don't know, but that's the answer for the Dolphins, that they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror after being out on the West Coast the last 2 weeks when they're home before they travel out to Buffalo. And they're going to have to ask themselves that. And whatever answer they come up with is probably what you're going to see as far as the Dolphins' ability to stay balanced and have success offensively.
Well, prediction time is coming here in just a moment. And if you have some predictions that you feel good about, head on over to betonline.net. That is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. And we've got it all over at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. It's BetOnline, and it's where the game starts.
Say you're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many, and as the night starts to come to an end, people start to head out. You may think of calling for a ride, but say to yourself, nah, you live close. You'll make it. No problems, no worries. What are the odds you'd get pulled over? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance rates goes up. Everyone knows the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. And that is why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Please play it safe and get a ride instead. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over.
All right, Kyle, it's that time where we offer predictions for this football game. And I don't mind going first here. I have the score of this game being 24-17 Bills. And the reason I think it's going to go that way is because I do think the Bills have a lot of advantages for this contest. And it really, a lot of it has to do with what the Dolphins have kind of been through lately with their last two games being out on the West Coast. They go to San Francisco 2 weeks ago. They stay on the West Coast to play the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. They're back in Miami, the wee hours of Monday morning, turning around to a road game in Buffalo on Saturday night. That's tough. That's a lot of attrition. That's a lot of wear and tear on a football team. You've even kind of heard some of that through Mike McDaniel talking about prioritizing rest and getting their bodies back on the East Coast type schedule. That's a tough ask for them, for this being the third game, the last game of a 3-game road trip against three good football teams. So I think that's tough. And then it's obviously the Bills are at home. It's a cold weather game, which you think should favor Buffalo. But more than anything, and less to do with Buffalo, but more to do with Miami, just because of the dynamics of this game, I think the best parts of the Dolphins are somewhat mitigated when you talk about explosive wide receivers and a quarterback in Tua that's, where he really maximizes those explosive receivers is with his ball handling, his quick twitch and ability to set his feet and get his hips set and that quick release. Some of that's going to be that's just, the timing is not going to be as easy or as consistent as it's been in the past when he's having to do that with snow and wind and cold, right? That's just it's a different environment, a tougher environment. Like I said, I remember the Reggie Bushes and the Jay Ajayis and the Ricky Williams, and even Lamar Miller had some of those moments in the snow. I don't know if this Dolphins team has that type of makeup to go out and really do that again here, especially if Jeff Wilson's unable to go. I think that's a pivotal injury. And like you mentioned there, what's going to happen here at left guard? Will they commit to running the football? Why didn't they the last 2 weeks? 8 rushing attempts against the 49ers in a game that was close all the way through. Whether or not the Chargers game felt close, it was. And they ran the ball 13 times, or they called 13 runs. To his credit, I thought he did a good job of actually scrambling in that game, which he'd been reluctant to do. And that made some good plays for their offense. But I just think it's a lot to ask for Miami in this ball game to not only meet the moment, but also, kind of have to adapt and execute a different style than what's made them successful this year. And so for those reasons, I have the Bills not getting swept this year by the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment. I agree with the perspective. I was thinking 23-20 Buffalo was probably going to be my official score prediction for this game for a lot of the elements that you've outlined. But oh, we both know this is a very weird league, too. We just watched the Houston Texans take the Dallas Cowboys to the limit, and we just watched the Chargers defense that had 7 backups physically take the Dolphins to the woodshed. So I think the Dolphins are capable. I think they're the biggest point of emphasis that I would say is I think the Dolphins are physically capable of changing the style of play. But as you said, between the elements and the travel and needing to change it and playing a different style, it's a lot to ask. I am hopeful that the Dolphins are going to come out and play inspired football. I'm hopeful that the Dolphins are going to come out and make some of those adjustments and that the elements will actually force them to do that. And they will be better over the final 3 games because of it. But it is one of those things where uh, Buffalo also didn't forget the week 3 game and how that ended and the sour taste in their mouths and playing in the heat. And now turnabout is fair play. And we're going to play in several inches of snow and in the 20s on a Saturday night after playing in 120-degree boiling sideline in week 3. So I think Buffalo can kind of sense the blood in the water. Miami, I think, will come out and play inspired, but I ultimately think, as you said and outlined, the variables here are going to be pretty tough for the Dolphins to overcome, but never say never. Fun fact, you mentioned Jay a couple times. Did you know that 50% of Jay's career rushing yards came in that 2016 season?
I thought you were going to say in that game. It felt like it. Watching.
No. Well, I mean, we could try to do the math. Neither one of us is big time math guys here, but
no.
he played 6 seasons in the NFL, had 2,500 career rushing yards, and had over 200 in that. I think he had 3 200-yard games that season. Put one up against the Steelers. I know he tagged the Bills twice for big yardage, but he was up over 200 with that big run in overtime to set him up for the game-winning field goal. So do not let the ghost of Jay Ajayi torment you too much, Bills fans, in the build-up to this game on Saturday night for sure.
No, it's one of those things, man, where you feel like you're good, right? And the way you don't want to go down if you're Buffalo is for those boys to come up there and say, yeah, we can do it. We can go play in the snow. We could take you down twice in 1 year, right? That's not the world that Bills Mafia wants to live in. So as much as you feel like it's an advantage, you'd hate for it to not be, right? And that kind of takes puts the pressure on you
back on Buffalo a little bit,
right, to go do it. So it'll be fun. The only game on Saturday night, so make sure you're plugged into NFL Network, 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. And, of course, neither podcast is done this week. We'll be back again for you tomorrow to close out the week and get you ready for this matchup. So make sure that you continue to make Locked On Bills and Locked On Dolphins your first listen every day. And, of course, check out the other outstanding podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. For Kyle Krabs, I'm Joe Marino. We look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.